Wyoming Territory, July 1882. The first time Xander Fitz rode into the dusty town of Willow Bend, he was only looking for a meal and a place to rest his horse. What he found instead was a woman with blood on her cheek, a busted lip, and a shotgun pointed straight at her back. "Put it down," Xander said, voice calm but sharp, his hand resting on the Colt at his hip. The man holding the gun turned. He was big, mean-looking, with whiskey on his breath and a sneer on his face. But he wasn't fast. Xander had the drop on him, and he knew it. "She's my wife," the man growled. "No," the woman said, her voice shaking. "He's lying. I never married him. He just follows me." Xander's eyes met hers, wide, terrified, but not broken. She had the look of someone who had been running a long time and was about to run out of road. Xander took a breath, then said, "She's my fiancée." The woman's eyes widened, and for a second he thought she might bolt, but she stayed still. "You're lying," the drunk spat. Xander stepped forward and took the woman's hand in his. "We're getting married today. Judge Miller's expecting us." He squeezed her fingers gently. "Aren't we, sweetheart?" She hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "Yes, we are." The man cursed and stormed off, muttering something about coming back. Xander waited until he was gone, then let go of her hand. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, brushing hair from her face. "Thank you. I did not think anyone would step in." "You got a name?" "Nella Kade," she said. "And I have 2 children waiting for me." Xander blinked. "Children?" "Yes. My son and daughter. They are just outside town, hiding with our wagon." He nodded slowly. "And that man? He used to work with my husband. After my husband died last winter, he started following us. Said I owed him. I do not. But he won't stop." There was a tightness in her voice, one she tried to hide but couldn't. Xander had seen the kind of fear before. He turned and looked toward the end of the street where the man had disappeared. "He is going to come back," Nella said quietly. Xander looked at her again. She was young, maybe 23, but her eyes were older. She had the kind of strength that came from surviving too much too soon. "Then we better make this real," he said. "You got anyone here who can vouch for you?" "Family? No. I have no one." Xander looked down at his boots, then back up at her. "If we go to the judge now, say we want to marry, he'll do it. He owes me a favor." She stared at him like he had lost his mind. "You're serious?" "I do not leave people to fend for themselves when I can help," he said simply. "And if he comes back, he will not get near you again. I promise that." She looked at him for a long moment. "And after, if you want to ride on with your children, I will not stop you. You'll be safe with my name." Nella looked away, blinking fast, then nodded. "All right. Let's do it." The ceremony was short. The judge barely looked up from his papers. Xander stood beside Nella, watching her hands tremble as she held the small ring he had bought on impulse a year ago and never used. "You do?" the judge asked him. "I do," Xander said. "You do?" he asked Nella. She looked up at Xander, her voice steadier now. "I do." The judge stamped the paper. "You're married." Just like that. Outside, the sun was starting to fall behind the hills. Xander touched Nella's elbow gently. "Let's go get your kids." She led him past the edge of town, where a wagon sat tucked behind some brush. 2 small heads popped up as they approached. "Penna, Pike," Nella called softly. A little girl, maybe 6, ran first. Her dark hair was braided, and her dress was patched at the elbows. A boy followed, barefoot and holding a stick like a sword. He looked about 4. "Mama!" Penna cried, throwing her arms around Nella's waist. Pike looked up at Xander, then stepped behind his sister. "It's all right," Nella said gently, pulling the boy forward. "This is Mr. Fitz. He helped us." Xander crouched to their level. "You can call me Xander." Penna tilted her head. "Are you our new daddy?" Nella went still. Xander looked up at her. Her eyes were wide again, but this time they were not afraid. He swallowed. "I guess I am." They rode out of Willow Bend before nightfall. Nella sat beside him on the wagon bench, the children curled up behind them in the back. The road stretched wide ahead, the prairie golden in the fading light. "You did not have to do that," she said quietly. I know. You do not know us. I know enough. She looked at him again, softer now. Why did you help? Xander kept his eyes on the road. Because you looked like someone who needed someone to stand beside her. And I had no one to stand beside. She was silent for a long time. Then she said thank you. The wind picked up, brushing strands of her hair against his arm. He did not move. They stopped at a small abandoned homestead 20 miles north, the frame still standing, the well still clean. Xander built a fire while Nella unpacked bread and dried apples for the children. That night, after the kids were asleep, she sat across from him by the fire. You could have just chased him off, she said. But you married me instead. Xander looked at her, the firelight casting gold across her face. I have always wanted a family, he said. Never thought I would find one like this, but here we are. Nella's voice was quiet. I never thought I would feel safe again. He reached across the fire, his fingers brushing hers. She did not pull away. Maybe we both found something we needed, he said. She nodded slowly, her eyes on his. Maybe we did. And for the first time in years, Xander felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. By the time the first frost crept into the corners of the abandoned homestead, the place had begun to feel like something lived in again. Xander patched the broken window panes with old flour sacks and tacked oilcloth over the worst drafts. Nella gathered cattail fluff and dry moss to stuff into the gaps between the logs. With every small repair, the house grew warmer, less like shelter and more like home. The children called him Papa now, though Pike still said it like a question. Penna said it with certainty, especially when she handed him her wooden doll to fix or asked him to lift her to the highest branch in the cottonwood. He never corrected them. One crisp morning, Nella stood at the edge of the field, sleeves rolled, her hands on her hips as she studied the stubborn earth where Xander had planted winter wheat. A faint breeze tugged at her skirt, the hem lined with dust from the walkout. You planted too shallow, she said, stepping over a furrow. Xander wiped his brow with the cuff of his shirt. They said 3 inches in town. 2's better here. When'll pull it up otherwise? He squinted at the ground, then at her. You've done this before. My father farmed rye in Dakota Territory, she said, kneeling to press a palm into the soil. He taught me more than he meant to. Xander crouched beside her. You miss it. I miss the smell of sweetgrass after rain, she said. But not the rest. He didn't ask more, just watched her fingers sift a clump of earth, gentle but sure. She had a way of moving like she was always listening to the land, to the wind, to what went unsaid. Later that day, he found her sewing by the hearth while the children napped. She'd turned a worn flannel shirt of his into a tunic for Pike, careful stitches running down the seams. You didn't have to do that, he said, leaning against the door frame. Didn't want to waste it, she replied. He likes your things. He stepped inside, brushing his hands clean on his trousers. You do all this without expecting anything in return? She looked up. No one ever gave me anything just to be kind. I don't know what to expect. Xander sat across from her, the fire casting slow-moving shadows across the floorboards. Maybe you should start expecting good things. She glanced down at the fabric again, smoothing the hem. I wouldn't know how. That night, as wind whistled through the trees, he found her on the porch wrapped in an old quilt, her knees tucked up, eyes on the moonlit pasture. I don't sleep easy, she said before he could speak. Too much noise in my head. He sat beside her, careful not to crowd her. I used to sleep in the saddle. Now I can't unless I hear Penna's laugh sometime during the day. She turned to him, surprised. She's loud. She's alive, he said. And she trusts me. That's worth something. For a long stretch, they sat with the silence between them, not heavy, just present. Then Nella spoke, so quietly he almost missed it. I didn't think anyone would ever want us. Not all 3 of us. I didn't think I'd ever have anyone, he said. Not even one. She looked straight at him. Why did you never marry? He hesitated. Because I was always passing through. Didn't think I could ask someone to stay still for me. Her lips pressed together. And now? I'm not going anywhere. A flicker passed through her eyes, fear, hope, maybe both, and she stood, drawing the quilt tighter around her shoulders. Good night, Xander. Night, Nella. She paused before opening the door. Pike asked if we'll have Christmas this year. I told him maybe. He nodded. Then we will. She nodded back, then slipped inside, leaving the door open just long enough for the warmth to spill out toward him. He stayed on the porch a while longer, the stars wheeling quietly overhead, thinking about a boy who wanted Christmas and a woman who'd stopped running. Tomorrow, he'd ride into the next town over and ask around for work. The wheat wouldn't be enough, but that was all right. He had a reason now, a whole reason, with two small voices and one quiet, watchful woman who'd begun to let down her guard. And that was more than he'd ever dreamed of. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the ground in a silence that made the world feel suspended. Xander had returned from Elk Hollow with a small sack of oats, a length of salted pork, and a new hat for Pike that he'd bartered off a trapper passing through. He'd also brought back word of a freight company hiring drivers come spring. He didn't say much about it, only that it paid steady and wouldn't take him more than a few days out at a time. Inside, the children sat near the stove, drawing lines in the frost that formed on the inside of the windows. Nella had taken to mending gloves and hemming old trousers, the rhythm of sewing keeping her hands busy when her thoughts ran too fast. "Can you read?" she asked one evening, her voice soft as she turned a page of a battered primer she'd found in the loft. Xander looked up from whittling a spoon from cottonwood. "I can read a ledger and a trail map. Not much more." "I could teach you," she said, not quite looking at him. He nodded. "All right." She set the book aside. "My husband couldn't. He never saw the use. Said cattle didn't care if you could spell." "Maybe not," Xander said, setting down the spoon, "but your boy might. If he's anything like his sister, he'll want to read everything in sight." Nella smiled faintly. "Penna's already asking what letters mean. Then we'll make sure she gets answers." She folded the book closed and rested it on her lap. "Do you want children of your own?" Xander's gaze found the glow of the stove. "I didn't think about it much. Always figured I'd be too late for it by the time I stopped moving." "You're not too late." He looked at her then. She wasn't offering anything, not yet, but her voice carried something steadier than it had before. She hadn't flinched when she asked the question. She wanted the truth. "I'd want them to grow up with a mother who knows how to stand her ground," he said. "And a father who doesn't run." They sat in the quiet that followed, letting the stove crackle and pop. That night, he found her outside again, this time not with a quilt, but with a tin lantern in one hand, checking the barn door. "Something wrong?" he asked, pulling his coat tighter. "Latch won't hold," she said. "Wind keeps working it loose." He knelt and fit a stone beneath the frame. "This'll hold it until I can fix it proper." She watched him, the lantern light catching the edge of his jaw. "You could have left us behind after the judge signed the paper." "I know. You stayed. I didn't see any reason to go." She stepped closer. "I don't think I ever told you about the day I lost Caleb. My husband." Xander stood slowly. "You don't have to." "I want to." Her breath came out in a cloud. "It was last December. He went out to shoot a buck. Snow came fast and he didn't come back. I found him the next morning. Rifle still cocked, but he'd fallen through the ice." Xander waited, hands still at his sides. "I tried to pull him up, but the cold got to him first." She looked down. "I buried him under a cottonwood. Told the children he'd gone to heaven." He didn't offer comfort, not right away. Instead, he said, "You carried both children, drove a wagon, and got all the way here. That's not just surviving, Nella. That's fighting." Her mouth trembled, but she didn't cry. "I didn't think anyone would understand," she said. "I do." She reached up then, carefully, and touched the edge of his collar, her fingers rough and warm. "You've been sleeping in the barn." "I didn't want to presume." She hesitated. "You could come inside. There's room. And I don't want to be alone anymore." He searched her face. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." They went in together, boots leaving melted prints behind them. Inside, the children snored soft and tangled in quilts. Nella lit the lamp low and turned back toward him. "You don't have to sleep on the floor," she said. "I won't," he replied. "Not if you don't want me to." "I don't." She took his hand then, not out of fear or gratitude, but of choice. It was the first time she had touched him without hesitation. And when they lay down beside each other that night, the wind still moving outside, it was not with urgency but with the kind of quiet that spoke of something lasting. Something earned. Something neither of them had thought they'd find again. He didn't sleep right away. He listened to her breathing, steady now, and the faint creak of the house settling in the cold. There was no question left in his mind. He hadn't just saved her life back in Willow Bend. Somewhere between the broken fence rail and the shared bread and the first laugh he coaxed from her son, she had given him a new one. And he meant to keep it. By late January, the wind cut sharper, and the snow deepened in quiet drifts along the northern fence. Xander rose before dawn most mornings to check the livestock and break ice from the trough. The cow they'd traded for in Elk Hollow was calving early, and he'd built a lean-to with salvaged boards to keep her out of the wind. Nella had filled the loft with bundles of dried grass she and Penna had gathered before the first snow. It kept the smell of earth in the house, even with the windows latched tight. That afternoon, Nella stood at the work table beside the hearth, her sleeves rolled past her elbows, kneading dough with a firm rhythm. Bits of flour clung to her wrists. Pike sat cross-legged near the fire, carving a small horse from a block of soft pine with Xander's old penknife. Penna read aloud from the primer, stumbling over a word and frowning. UNIFORM, she said. Uniform, Xander offered from where he sat mending a broken harness strap. Means everyone's dressed the same. Penna tilted her head. Like soldiers? Exactly. She nodded and went on. Nella didn't look up from her dough but asked, Did you serve? Xander's stitching paused for the briefest moment. I was 16 when the war ended, he said. Didn't see a battlefield, but I drove supplies for the army the winter after Appomattox. Missouri roads were thick with mud and men who didn't know what to do next. Nella dusted her hands on her apron. My brother signed up when he was 15. Lied about his age. Didn't come home. You talk about him much? I haven't spoken his name in years, she said. Not since Ma passed. She turned and met his eyes. His name was Eli. Xander nodded, slow and sure. He sounds like someone worth remembering. She gave a small nod and turned back to the dough. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It had a kind of reverence to it. That evening, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned down to embers, Nella pulled a folded cloth from the wooden chest at the foot of the bed. She laid it across the quilt between them. Inside were 3 small items: a tin brooch in the shape of a rose, a letter sealed with cracked wax, and a bundle of blue yarn tied into a cross. These are from my mother, she said. She gave them to me when I married Caleb. Told me to save them for when I felt lost. Xander didn't reach for them. He just watched her hands as she touched each one. I haven't shown these to anyone since she died, she said. But I want you to know the people I came from. He leaned forward, careful not to disturb the cloth. Your mother sounds like she knew how to hold a family together. Nella nodded. She did. Even when we had nothing but hard bread and a worn-out mule. She set the items back in their folds and tied the cloth again. I didn't bring much with me when I left Dakota. Just the children and this. Sometimes that's all you need. She looked at him steadily. I've been waiting for the feeling to go away. The one that says this is borrowed, that it'll be taken. It won't, he said. Not this. She reached up, brushing her hair behind her ear. I want to believe that. Xander took her hand, gentle and certain. Then let me show you. She didn't speak, but she didn't pull away either. Her fingers curled into his, and they sat like that until the lamp burned low. By February, the calf had survived its first storm, and Penna had taken to feeding it scraps of corn mash by hand. Pike had finished his wooden horse and painted it with soot and lard to give it color. Nella planted sweet pea seeds in jars on the sill, saying they needed something green to look at come spring. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ridge and snowmelt dripped from the eaves, Xander stood with Nella on the porch, arms folded against the cold. I got a letter back from the freight company, he said. They'll take me on in March. I'd be gone 4 days at a time, maybe 5. Nella's brow furrowed. That's a long ride. I'll be back between every run. And I'll leave money each time. She stared out at the pale sky. We'll manage. I didn't say it for that, he said. I want to start saving for lumber. Build a room for the children. And maybe something more permanent than this old place. She looked up at him, something unreadable in her expression. You want to stay here, long term? I do, he said. If you do. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned back toward the door, then paused. You said once you didn't expect to find a family. I didn't. She nodded, then pushed the door open and went inside. When he followed, she was by the stove, ladling stew into bowls. The children were already seated, their hands washed, their faces expectant. Nella passed him a bowl and said, then maybe it's time we start calling this home. Xander took the bowl, his throat tight. He looked at the three of them, the way Penna leaned into her mother's side, the way Pike's eyes followed his every move. It was more than he'd ever wanted. And it was his. The last of the snow melted slow into the earth, leaving muddy ruts along the trail that curved past the cottonwoods. By the first week of March, Xander had made 2 runs for the freight company, each one taking him west toward Fort Washakie and back again. Every return brought new weariness to his bones, but also an ache he couldn't name until he stepped into the doorway and heard Penna's voice or saw the way Nella's shoulders eased when she looked up and found him standing there. That afternoon, the sun broke through for the first time in days, and Nella was out back with Pike, showing him how to check the chicken coop for soft eggs. Xander stood at the edge of the porch, a letter in his hands. It was from Judge Miller, written in his uneven hand, and offered to buy the deed to the old homestead outright. The land wasn't much, but it was theirs, and the judge had remembered the promise he owed. Inside, Penna sat on the floor, threading bits of yarn through holes she'd poked in a square of oilcloth. She looked up when she saw the paper in his hand. What's that? He crouched beside her. It's a chance to keep this place. For good. Her eyes lit up. Like forever? If your mama agrees, he said. It'll be in both our names. Penna leaned close, lowering her voice the way children do when they think something is sacred. She likes it here, even when she pretends she doesn't. He smiled at that and ruffled her hair. I know. Later, when Nella came in, brushing hay from her skirt, Xander handed her the letter. She read it leaning against the stove, her lips moving slightly as she followed the words. When she finished, she looked up slowly. You want to stay? I do, he said. But not just for the land. I want to build something that belongs to all of us. She folded the paper carefully. I've never owned anything before. Not really. You've kept this family together through worse than hard winters, he said. If anyone's earned a piece of ground to call her own, it's you. Her eyes shone, but she didn't speak right away. Instead, she walked across the room, opened the drawer where she kept the tin brooch and her mother's cloth bundle, and slid the judge's letter beside them. Then we stay, she said. That night, the house felt different. Not quieter, not louder, just rooted. As though the walls themselves knew they wouldn't be left behind again. The next morning, Xander came in from the barn to find Nella standing at the table with a small stack of folded fabric scraps from an old petticoat, a shirt of Pike's too small to mend, and one of Penna's dresses worn soft at the hem. I thought maybe we could start a quilt, she said. Something that belongs to this house. He looked at the pile. You want help? She grinned. You any good with a needle? Terrible, he admitted. Well, she said, then you can sit beside me and keep the fire fed. They worked like that for days, Nella stitching, Xander keeping the children from tangling the thread, Pike falling asleep with his head on Xander's leg more than once. The quilt grew slowly, a patchwork of the life they were building, square by square. One evening, as dusk settled and the quilt lay half-finished across their laps, Nella shifted to face him. I've been thinking about something, she said. All right. She hesitated. We never had a wedding. Not really. Xander blinked. You want one. I want to stand beside you and say it like we meant it from the start. Not because we had to, but because we chose to. He reached for her hand, his voice low. Then let's do it proper. They planned it simple. Just the 4 of them, a borrowed ribbon for Penna's hair, and the old cottonwood behind the house. Pike stood solemn with a bundle of dried sage in his hands, and Penna held a ring they'd traded for in Elk Hollow, a plain brass band, but polished bright. Xander looked at Nella, her dark hair braided and pinned, her eyes steady. I promise to stay. he said. Not just in this place, but with you. Every day, every season. She nodded, voice clear. I promise to let you in, to let you carry some of what I've held alone, and to build something with you that lasts. They kissed with the wind in their hair and the children between them, laughter rising into the wide Wyoming sky. Years passed. The house grew. Xander added a second room with help from a man he'd met on the freight route. The children outgrew their boots faster than they could be patched. Penna learned to read every word she could find, pie-carved animals from driftwood and left them on the porch rail to dry. They planted beans and corn, and in the spring of the third year, Nella gave birth to a daughter they named Eliza. One evening, long after the children had gone to bed, Nella stood in the doorway holding the baby, watching the light fade over the ridge. Xander came up behind her, his hands settling on her waist. She has your eyes, he said. And you're quiet, she replied. They stood like that for a while, the house behind them warm with the sound of sleeping children and the scent of wood smoke. I never thought I'd have this, she said. You gave it to yourself, he whispered. I just had the good fortune to be let in. She leaned back against him. You stayed. I'll always stay. And he did. Through every season, through every year that followed, the doors of their home stayed open. The fire never went out, and the love between them quiet, solid, and earned carried them through a life of hard beauty and gentle joy.